Okay, so, yeah, today we're doing another video, and I know that there's some crazy shit going on outside the world with the coronavirus and all that. Don't worry about me, I'm staying indoors. I'll be fine. Hopefully school shuts down longer than 2 weeks, which, God, if they don't, what the fuck? What the fuck is wrong with y'all? But, whatever. Fuck, I'm not catching that shit. I don't know, I don't care if it doesn't affect me. I can still spread it. It's very, very terrible. Louisiana isn't doing a lot of testing. So, yeah. Scary. So, yeah, today, I wanted to talk a bit about JoJo. I'm wearing a JoJo shirt right now. Just got Animal Crossing, and well, I didn't just get it, but, I named my town Animal Crossing Morio, because I was like, I had JoJo in the brain, And, yeah, I wanted to talk a bit about JoJo, specifically the stand parts of JoJo. I'm talking about the anime exclusively. I'm an anime only, but, I want to talk about JoJo because, fuck, man, it's on my mind right now. And I'm not ready to read the manga just yet, I'm waiting for the anime because I really like the way David Production handles the anime. I think I'm actually going to just, it's not like a situation, and I've seen the manga, and the manga's a bit, all due respect to Araki. Hirohiko Araki, the mangaka of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, but, I'd rather watch JoJo, or experience JoJo for the first time in, the beautiful David Production kind of, anime style, personally. So, yeah, today I wanted to do a comparison of Part 3 to Parts 4 and 5, and sort of point out the fact, a lot of the aspects of Part 3 that Parts 4 and 5 do a lot better. But before I get to that, I actually want to compliment Part 3 a lot, because I actually really like this part. And despite everything I'm going to say later in this video, I do really like the part. But I have a lot of gripes with it. It's probably my second least favorite part in JoJo, and anime only, obviously, but yeah. Least favorite being Part 1. Nothing against Part 1. I really like Part 1, but every other part after Part 1 is stronger than Part 1 in some aspect. I'm not a Phantom Blood hater. I like and respect Phantom Blood quite a lot. That's the foundation of JoJo. That's where everything else is built off on, and you have to have respect for it. You have to have respect for Phantom Blood. It's the DNA of Phantom Blood is in the rest of the series. Without Phantom Blood, there would be no JoJo. So, yeah, you have to respect it. Personally, for me, Part 3, just get back on the track of the actual topic. Part 3 is probably the most overrated JoJo part, I'd say. I'd say it's pretty goddamn overrated. Some people act like Part 3 is where JoJo becomes this masterpiece, and I'm like, that was kind of Part 2, honestly. Part 2 was really good. Part 3's good. Not Part 2 good, but it's still pretty good. Parts 4 and 5 are great. Part 3 is no, masterpiece, though. And I really like Part 3. And just to clarify, Part 3 does have my favorite final battle in JoJo. Favorite final battle does not mean favorite part, but I still really like the battle between Jotaro and Dio. That's just one of my favorite final battles. And that is my favorite final battle in JoJo, because the stakes are in that fight are super duper high. Everyone else has been taken down. Jotaro is the only one standing. And, there's a lot on the line there. And, Jotaro discovering his true stand ability is amazing. It's kind of an ass pull, yeah, but, okay, I kind of feel bad for saying earlier that, JoJo's not I love JoJo a lot. And I like each part, and each part has to bring to the table. And I'm not one of those people that's trying to say, oh, yeah, getting into JoJo is so hard, part 1 sucks. No, it doesn't. Actually, the first episode of JoJo is actually one of the most captivating, because Dio just shows up out of nowhere and fucking trashes, Jonathan's house. Like, well, it doesn't trash it, but you know what I mean? He just, like, ruins Jonathan's life. And it's like, from episode 1, Rocky wanted to make sure from the jump you hated Dio. From the jump, you hated everything about Dio, and you wanted to see him suffer. From the jump. So, yeah. I lost my train of thought there for a second, but, part three. No, I really like the final battle of part 3. I like, Jotaro discovering the time stop ability, that he has it. There's a lot of there's a lot of cool things that are in there, like Jotaro pretending that he's dead, that sort of thing. The Polnareff coming in there with the assist. And the Road Roller, of course. God, I mean, there's so many iconic moments from that part. The knife throwing scene. Jotaro keeping the books under his chest, to protect protect his chest. I mean, there's a lot of great moments like that in part 3, in the final battle of part 3. And one of my other favorite things about part 3 is just the ticking clock of it all. Like, getting to Egypt, there's a ticking clock, to stop Dio, and they stop him on the last possible day. I like ticking clocks like that because it adds more tension to a story. Another thing to mention, though, is part 3's characters, are some of the most lively characters, which I do agree with, But, yeah, I mean, and that's not everything I like about part 3. That's just, like, a lot of the things that I think part 3 does better than every other part. Part 2 does the ticking clock a little bit better, but I just wanted to, that part 3 does better than the 2 other parts. The characters, not really, but I just wanted to shout out the characters because, Kakyoin and Polnareff, those are the boys, those are the homies. Plus, part 3 introduced stands, and every other part would be influenced by part 3 in some way. So, yeah. But to talk about sort of, I guess, why part 4 and 5 have stronger narratives than part 3, I think it really comes down to the fact that JoJo Part 3 kind of runs in a straight line. What I mean by that is that JoJo Part 3, the characters have a clear goal from the beginning, right? They have a clear goal in the beginning, and that's to stop Dio. And they kind of go to that straight line all the way to the end. And they stop Dio and save Jotaro's mom, right? I mean, that's kind of the foundation that they have to follow, throughout the story is go stop Dio. And, I like that part 2 was more of a dynamic story, compared to part 3, because part 2 wasn't just one, solid adventure. There was a lot of things that Joseph had to do, Joseph had to go rescue Speedwagon from, the Nazis and got tangled up in, the Pillar Men, and then once he encounters the other Pillar Men, he's gonna die in 30 days, and so he trains with Caesar. He learns about the Red Sun of Asia. There's just a lot of different aspects to the story of part 2, and a lot of world-building aspects, whereas part 3 is more of a straight-line kind of story. But I do love the different stand battles that they take part in. Part 3 has, some very interesting stand battles. Not some of them great, some of them but I feel like, that was Araki's first stand part, so he was still figuring out stuff, and I still think some fights, like the Death 13 fight and the Darby fight, are really, really, really good. The Pet Shop fight, I mean, there's some, like, the freaking, oh my god, the Alessi fight, like, oof. The Steely Dan fight, I liked quite a bit. That was cool. That was a cool concept and idea. Introduced shrinking stands, which would never come back in the series ever again, but still cool. But, there's just some that are like, yeah, let's not. Oh my god. I mean, the stand fight, I mean, even Araki was like, these stand battles are getting a little bit repetitive and threw in the sun. There's just this joke, stand. And by the time they get to the Egypt half, I think the stand battles get a lot less repetitive. And my point isn't that the stand battles are repetitive. My point is that the story goes on for a straight line. And, it kind of feels like there's not really a lot of dynamic elements in the story. Whereas in part 4 and part 5, in the middle of the story, there are big changes that happen that change the rest of the story. Part 4 has, of course, the introduction of Yoshikage Kira and the discovery of Yoshikage Kira by the main characters, and sort of having that, mystery element out of the part 4, where they're trying to find, where Yoshikage Kira is, who is Yoshikage Kira now? Because they know, he basically used Cinderella to change his, form it into someone else, so they're trying to go locate him. And it adds this mystery element to part 4, this investigation. It's like, you really get engaged, Rohan's the one who's doing most of the investigating, but you really get engaged in, the investigation. And it changes things up because now Kira's in a completely different situation, pretending to have to be this husband, and introduce the character of Hayato. There's a lot of cool stuff that happens in the second part of part 4 where it changes up the course of the narrative. Part 5 is probably an even bigger change, which is when they have a goal in mind. See, I wish Star Wars Crusaders did something like this, where the characters have a goal in mind, which is to retrieve Trish to the boss. And it changes once you realize that the boss is trying to kill Trish. Now, from the jump that Giorno wants to eventually take over, as the head of the Mafia. But still, it's, you aren't expecting the boss to have his daughter killed. And it adds, like, a wild element to it. And after this revelation, the team betrays the boss. They betray the organization. They betray Passione. And that, to me, was such a big moment, because from that point onward, the team, their actual goal has shifted and changed. The story has taken a diverging path from where it was originally going. And I like it when stories do that. Part 4 as well, shifted and changed a lot. From being a slice of life kind of series to being a mystery. And I like it when stories sort of do that sort of thing. Part 2, does that thing with not only introducing, of course, you think that the main of the enemy is going to be vampires, and early in the story you learn it's the Pillarmen, and, also, like, Cars, using the stone mask, Caesar's death. I mean, all these moments. And Caesar's death isn't something that's saved for later in the story. It happens kind of in the middle of the story of part 2. And it's this big, shocking moment that you're just like, oh, fuck. Like, oh, fuck, And, yeah, that to me was just, part 2 is a story that was way more dynamic. Same thing with part 4 and part 5. Part 1, not really, but again, part 1 was really about setting up the foundation of the rest of the series. I just like the horror aspects of part 1. That's really, when you talk about my favorite aspects of part 1, I like the gothic aesthetic of part 1 a lot, which is something that's dropped later, which, was fine, but I did like that part 1 was going for a gothic sort of horror aesthetic, I like that sort of thing. But, that's sort of one of my main gripes. But also, again, in parts 4 and 5, I feel like the stand battles contributed to the story way more. Part 4, each stand user from a stand battle, well, most of them, most of the stand battles introduces a character that will be reoccurring throughout the series. And I like that because each stand battle introduces a key member of the town of Morio. Like, these characters aren't just one-offs. You know, they're characters who will be relevant later. They're characters, you know, like, you know, of course, Part 3 did this, you know, with Kakyoin and Polnareff, and, of course, Whole Horse later, who would just reoccur throughout Part 3. You know, the thing is that Part 3, you know, it kind of had recruiting characters, and then it stopped, and, you know, it's not that I wanted Part 3 to be about recruiting characters, but at least have, you know, each stand battle. Now, the story does progress with each stand battle, but the thing is that each stand battle doesn't leave that much of an impact in the story. And when it happens, it's very rare. Or it's just undone. Like, Kakyoin being blind. That's kind of, you know, just thrown aside. You know, Avdol dying. Nope. Nope. And I know Rocky was originally intending to make Whole Horse, you know, replace Avdol with Whole Horse. But, you know, it felt like those story elements were, you know, didn't leave too much of an impact on the story. And when Part 4 introduces, you know, each stand battle in Part 4, it introduces a new aspect of the town of Morio that recurs throughout the series. You know, and a lot of the big stand battles, you know, introduce a lot of the bigger concepts. Like, you know, at the beginning, you have, you know, the battle with Keicho Nijimura and Okuyasu Nijimura. And you learn about, you know, their father and how he had Dio cells inside of him. And now, you know, he's all fucked up because Dio died. And, you know, you have the origin of the stand arrow, and you get the introduction of Red Hot Chili Pepper, you know, who's kind of like the first antagonist of Part 4, really, is Red Hot Chili Pepper. Don't worry, guys, I don't have it. I don't have it. But, like, you know, and Part 5 sort of had, you know, stand battles to, you know, each stand battle felt like them progressing more and more on their journey. Now, that was that in Part 3, but the difference is in Part 5 is that their journey had a lot of different aspects to it. It had a lot of different, you know, aspects to it. Not only that, you know, they had to grab different items. They had to go to certain places. It wasn't just a straight line. It was, you know, like trying to reach the goal, you know. It was sort of like solving a puzzle. Not only that, but you also had the members of La Squadra, you know, who were after the boss. And so you get this introduction to this, you know, this group. And I know that Dio kind of had an assortment of characters, but you really get the sense with La Squadra, like, these guys are a family. These guys are a team that work together, you know. Of course, La Squadra aren't the villains throughout Part 5. But I really like the fact that the actual enemy team were like a family. You know? Like, that was fucking cool. I don't know. That was cool. Not to mention each stand battle in Part 5. You know, it wasn't like an easy battle. It required a lot of help from all parties. You know, like, everyone had to do their job, you know. You know, there's several battles where Mist is doing one thing, and Giorno's doing one thing, and, you know, and Bruno's doing one thing, and Abakio's doing one thing, and Naranj is doing... Everyone has to lend a hand. Not everyone, but, you know, it's more often than not where usually, you know, you see, you know, two or more characters having to team up against, you know, one common enemy. And I love that sort of thing. I just love that sort of thing in Part 5. And in Part 3 is mostly full of one-on-one type of battles. You know, usually one-on-one, sometimes two-on-one, but then it kind of turns into a one-on-one thing. you know, and then Jotaro just kind of ors them, you know. I mean, I did like that in part 5 there was more of an element of teamwork added into it. Well, that's also the case for part 4 as well. But I feel like it's emphasized stronger in part 5. And you see the group, you know, have to bite tooth and nail to get through every fight. And you see, you know, Giorno having to heal their wounds and stuff. You know, Bruno literally dies and comes back with the power of resolve, which was actually better than Avdol's fake death, because Bruno really did die. It actually set up for something in the plot. Was that Bruno really did die, and the Bruno that, you know, was working with them still was actually like a resuscitated corpse that was rotting, you know, and he starts losing his vision, he starts to lose his hearing, and, you know, Bruno, you know, it actually ended up incorporating into the story, you know, instead of Avdol dying twice, Bruno actually was dead the entire time. See, that's one of the interesting twists, is that, like, Bruno was dead, and it was sort of something that Araki planned. And you can see that Araki had become a better storyteller as JoJo went on, you know, and sort of planned for a lot of this stuff to happen. So yeah, that's just my sort of thoughts on this. I mean, I pretty much went over 2 main points, but there's a lot of other ones too. I mean, antagonist-wise, Kira's amazing. As much as I love Dio, and Dio's great, Kira's just fantastic. Diavolo is so interesting because he's got this multiple personality thing going on, which, like, you know, adds another dynamic to the character, because there's 2 different characters within that one character. That adds this sort of, you know, element to it where you got 2 different, you know, enemies that are really, you know, of course it is Diavolo as the main foe, but you still have Doppio in there as well. And that's a lot of, you know, that's a lot of fun that they play around with that. I don't know. Go watch JoJo.